Surprises can be had on the goldfields as well. Often it's dig up rubbish, rubbish, rubbish again, more rubbish, then bang, out pops a nice piece of yellow. And often from the ground that only seems to contain dirt and stones and seemingly totally out of place. In fact, I have found that most of the time I end up with just one stone in my hand which seems somewhat heavier than the others. So it's a kind of disbelief and carelessness. I often pop the heavier stone in my mouth to see if it reveals the yellow colour that I'm looking for. And often really wonder how that got there. Often the next thought is the question, are there any other in the ground around like this? And yes, there nearly always is, especially the smaller pieces of gold. And once you find it, you are pretty much hooked, and you'll learn to be more careful in your searches.
I think we might find something nice here, maybe a couple of ounces.
Certainly possible. Rule number 1 in the goldfield areas is to keep out of the light drift areas, as they are rarely more than a waste of time. You can tell the light drift areas because they are dominated by fine light earth and items like silver foil. Just thought I'd show you the size of some of the holes here. Rule number 2 is know what gold sounds like in heavily mineralized ground. Even though the small pieces of gold are more common and easier to find, the fact is that they are more difficult for the detector to tell the difference between smaller pieces of gold and patches of concentrated minerals in the ground. A gold nugget, or at least a small one, always sounds like a lump in the ground, very closely resembling a piece of lead. The other factor which determines success is that although there are patches of ground in the goldfield areas which contain gold, it is only the very small patches within these patches where gold can be found on the surface or close enough to the surface to be found with a metal detector. And often there is a layer of topsoil on the surface which hides from the eyes what actually lies below. In other words, for those old timers who initially discovered gold pieces on the surface in these areas, it was literally a complete surprise for them.
5 minutes ago, found a little nugget. Was going to leave it. It sounded like rubbish. Unbelievable.
Just open your hand up and give us a look at it. The average gully in these goldfields in Australia contain hundreds of large gold pieces weighing ounces.
Oops, out of focus.
Many single pieces weighing several kilograms, and often either close to the surface or on the surface itself. History tells us back in those days of the first gold discoveries, they didn't report their finds and were far more concerned with making a meagre living from the farm, raising sheep and so forth. Where they found the gold was only made to the public after the government forced them to reveal the truth. In other words, the general feeling to those who found gold was disbelief, and even the others who were told to where and how to find these often very large pieces of gold were also in complete denial, despite concrete evidence of great riches just below their feet and in the fields where their sheep and cattle graze. Rule number 3 is be in the zone and relax. I find that after I visit a new area, not only are my preconceptions often shattered, I have to contend with isolating a small area from a vast open space and get busy exploring when nothing could be more counterproductive. I have never found gold in this mood, only when I've been completely relaxed and in the zone, so to speak. It is like my impatience leads me to be haphazard and rush around carelessly, and considering that gold often only presents a whisper of a signal, and that by covering a random area only leads to further frustration and more carelessness and no gold. Therefore, gold is, at least for me, always found when I least expect it, and when I'm not too concerned about finding it. Opportunity for me on the goldfields not only knocks once, it's true, but it will most often do so very quietly. It is a good idea to determine a suitable area for detecting on a prior separate trip, as the more relaxed you are and the more time you spend in the likely areas, the better your chances of finding the often very faint signal that gold nuggets often present, and actually recognizing it for what it is another story. The development of the Goldfinder XTR was not a difficult project, and a prototype was built from local materials here in Australia like PVC or polyvinyl chloride. It was an excellent choice because it is non-metallic, light, strong and completely weatherproof. But it took a huge amount of time and effort to get it working at peak performance in the saltwater conditions. However, because it is based on the same principle as Eric Foster's pulse induction design, it is designed to work brilliantly where other detectors fail. This detector also proved unique in that it has a very powerful audio, even at max depth, and with some modifications it has the capacity to separate ferrous from non-ferrous items at these depths with different color LEDs in the coil itself. In other words, it has a basic discriminator function. For example, iron targets could be red and gold and other non-ferrous metals could be yellow. However, the search coil has to be completely redesigned if it's going to work in the goldfields. Here you're asking a detector to recognize a metallic object through earth, which is not only heavily laden with conductive materials like metal, but fluctuates wildly on every pass. In other words, the detector has to penetrate the equivalent to a huge mass of iron filings while having the power to concentrate energy on a not so very conductive material like gold, and then pick up this slight energy increase without interference from the wildly fluctuating, heavily impregnated ground. This was eventually achieved by changing the shape of the search coil so it creates a narrower field to effectively penetrate less ground while increasing sensitivity to small metal targets. We discovered that with the right shape, or the shape just before the field cancels itself out with the aluminium foil shielding, means that the detector will operate from salt water to dry land perfectly without a ground balance of any kind. In other words, there's no need for fine-tuning controls. It just switches on and works anywhere and under any condition, completely unaffected by mineralized soil conditions, which puts the detector in the same class as the big boys, so to speak, but having a much less complex and expensive design. This is perfect for people who are inexperienced or just want an inexpensive switch on and go metal detector, but it is too costly for me to produce, especially on my own. Please also note that this detector cannot compete in the goldfields with the high-end gold detectors, as the electronics in these detectors are far more sophisticated and better equipped to deal with extreme mineralization. A lot of metal detector users like to use VLF detectors as they tend to ignore bits of iron which can plague some areas and can take the fun out of finding stuff. Hence the reason I sometimes like to use the Fisher Goldbug, as it is a typical low frequency detector. Old, yes, but good, which is not the best at penetrating salty conditions. It's more made for the goldfield areas, but it gives a clear bad signal on bottle tops, which plagues some areas on the beach, for example. Therefore, less time is spent on digging up trashy items like bottle tops and iron pieces, and less frustration using it in trashy areas. One of the best clues to these types of areas is on the historical information in the library, or nowadays good information can be accessed from the internet or from the local council itself. The age of the coins found in these areas can be confirmation of a good area, and this can be encouragement to look past the often plethora of modern trash like bottle tops and ring pools, and can lead to isolating likely areas where the more valuable items lie. However, the rules are not always consistent. There have been times when I've just dug 1 or 2 targets in a new area and then found, for example, a diamond platinum ring in a dry sand.